Welcome to the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast. I'm Jeremiah Regan.
And I'm Juan, and we're on to a new course today, Charles Dickens A Christmas Carol. We're going to look at Lecture 1 today, the introduction, A Ghost Story of Christmas.
Now, Juan, when we do this podcast, we try to make sure that it's timeless in the sense that one of our listeners can turn it on and listen to it at any time of the year. But it's really hard not to admit that we are recording this right now, right before Thanksgiving, trying to get into the Christmas spirit. Of course, if you're listening to this in the sunny weather of July, you'll benefit greatly, but it's going to be particularly delightful if you're listening to this in the Christmas season.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the great things about this course is, of course, everybody's familiar with the story. And before we filmed the course, I hadn't really read the book, but I was familiar with the story through the movies. And it never really dawned on me why it was a Christmas story, in the sense that, movies today make everything about Christmas being nice and being generous.
Well, and often being a Christmas movie means there's some snow and some decorations. Right. It doesn't really have anything to do with the themes of Christmas.
Right. But then when you understand, and we do in the course thanks to Dwight Lindley and his teaching, that this is a conversion narrative. It's about a man who is lost, and he's very clearly described as lost, and he has an encounter with the divine, and therefore he is essentially reborn, and that's the change that happens in this person. So that's a story that is good for Christmas because we are essentially encountering the divine when Christ is born, but it's also a story that is good all year round.
That's right. And so the way this course works, A Christmas Carol is a slim, beautiful, delightful volume. We have 6 lectures in this course, and you mentioned Dwight Lindley. He is a professor of English. He's also my neighbor, and so I know him to be a very un-Scrooge-like man. He's a generous man. He does a great job explaining the setting, why Dickens wrote this book, and then exploring each of the themes. Again, it's a slim book, but by devoting 6 lectures to this course, we're able to really bring out, and I should say Dwight is really able to bring out the beautiful teaching within this beautiful book.
And speaking of the book, Hillsdale created its own version of the book of A Christmas Carol. And you can get that if you go to hillsdale.edu/course. That's hillsdale.edu/course. I recommend getting the book. First of all, it allows us to share the course with other people. It's a donation that you give of $100 and you get the book in return. But it is the book that we use in the course. So if you see Dwight Lindley in the course reading from page 8 of the book, it's actually the book that we have here. And it has custom illustrations that we made specifically for the course. So it's a beautiful edition of A Christmas Carol that you can get, again, if you go to hillsdale.edu/course.
And I'll interject. We took some pains to make it a beautiful book. You see it. It's a Christmassy green color with gilded letters on it. It has a nice red ribbon in it, so it feels very Christmassy. The text is crisp. The custom illustrations are nice, and it has an introduction to the book by Dwight Lindley himself. Let's turn to Professor Lindley in Lecture 1 of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, A Ghost Story of Christmas.
Welcome, I'm Dwight Lindley, and I teach English at Hillsdale College. Here today to talk about A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And my basic goal in teaching this, in talking with you about it, is to illuminate some of how this novella, this little work, comes to life in our minds and our imaginations as we're reading it, and then hopefully to make it come to life a little bit more as well. To start off with, I'd like to talk about the framework that surrounds this work, that could help us understand it historically and in the context of Dickens' own life. Charles Dickens, born 1812. This is an 1843 work, so he's 31 years old. He's been living through the 19th century, and what kinds of things was he experiencing that are going to be important here? One of the big factors we call today the Industrial Revolution. We have the development of multiple kinds of technology. In agriculture, the technologies of production and harvesting. You have then the technologies of shipping and of processing. You have all kinds of factory technologies and machines for developing and producing goods. And this is just changing the face of England. So you have, among many other phenomena that are attached to this, you have everybody moving to the cities because you have rural laborers. They need to move on because their work is now being done by machines. There are fewer of them needed, and you can make more money in the city. So they're moving to the city, and they're filling up vast areas where there weren't people before, which are now slums. Some of them are really just shanty towns, villages that have sprung up overnight where poor people live. Dickens was obsessed with these places. They populate his novels. This means, among other things, that we've got hard times for children. Children, some of them would be without parents. They would be orphans. But then you also have child labor. You have children who are used to working with their families in the country, now going off to work by themselves in the factory. These are 8, 10, 12-year-olds, sometimes even younger than that. There was a report of the Children's Employment Commission that was looking at child labor and presenting to a civilized audience these horrifying spectacles of what small children are being put through in these factories. This is kind of a look under the cover of their bustling, new, exciting culture that was developing. Look where the cost of this is coming down and affecting real lives. Charles Dickens himself, all of those things that I was just speaking about, they touched him personally in interesting and important ways for this book. So Charles Dickens himself was raised lower middle class. They were doing all right, but there were times, a few years in particular, where they lost everything, his family, and fell into deep poverty. There was one year when he was 12. He's the oldest child of his parents. He's 12. His parents are taken off to debtor's prison, an institution they had at the time. They have to live there, and he has to work on his own in a factory and support himself, live by himself, make his own bread. This is a traumatic time by any account. Even though he arises out of that, finishes his education in a way, and goes off and becomes obviously a very successful writer, that time in poverty marked him and filled his heart with this real deep sympathy for the poor. Camden Town, this is one of the places he lived when he was on the poor side with his family as a kid. That's where the Cratchits live. They live in a place where Dickens used to live, actually. A bunch of little connections like this between The Christmas Carol and Dickens's own life. For example, he read that report that I mentioned about child labor. He thought, I've got to write something in response to this. His first thought was, I need to write some kind of tract, a piece of nonfiction exhortation to readers who can afford to help take care of these people, to raise awareness, as we like to say now. And he was initially intended to do that, but after sitting on it for a couple of days, he thought, you know what? No. I've got to write a piece of fiction. I can hit so much harder. I can change hearts and minds so much more powerfully with a piece of fiction. What he actually wrote to a friend of his, he says, if I write the right kind of story, it will come down like a sledgehammer. It will come down with 20 times the force that some mere tract or kind of piece of moral exhortation will. I'm going to kind of bring these situations into the minds and hearts of people. So as he's writing A Christmas Carol, he's walking all over London, especially the poor parts of London. Dickens was a great walker. He would go on miles of walks every day. But during the time of Christmas Carol and its writing, he's walking through especially the impoverished parts. This is something that he wrote about this. I would walk about the black streets of London, 15 and 20 miles, many a night when all the sober folks had gone to bed. So he's out trying to fill his mind and imagination with the images that he needs to bring to life, that he needs to make real and to burst out onto the page into the lives of his readers. The last piece of background from Dickens's own life that I want to bring out that I think is relevant here for understanding this book has to do with his own financial situation. As I said, he's a successful novelist now. He's written Pickwick Papers and Nicholas Nickleby and Oliver Twist and some other very successful novels. And yet he's not flush with cash right now. Why? Well, as you make more money, you can buy a bigger house. You can buy a nicer place to live, as it's understandable he did. He's also having more kids. Even though he's only 31 years old, he has 4 kids and a 5th on the way. So more money, more problems. He needs to make ends meet. He's also supporting his relatives. His father, who is a spendthrift, can't hold on to money. His son is supporting him and other people in their family, hangers-on of various kinds. This still happens to people with money today. So he's got all kinds of reasons that he needs money. He's hoping to make it with this little book. Well, how does he go about that? He makes the book as nice as possible. He thinks, once he's writing it, he thinks, this is beautiful. I want this to be a gift to everyone who reads it. So they make it nice, bold color, gold embossed letters on the front, gold end papers around the sides. It's a beautiful artifact. Well, that sounds kind of expensive. That is expensive to make that kind of book. And he says, we can only charge 5 shillings for this, which is not very much money, because I want everybody to have a copy of this who wants it. Okay, so high production values, low cost. That means not much margin for profit. He doesn't actually make that much money. Even though that's the point of this in some ways, even though he needs it and it sells well, okay? Still, he's not making much money because of his generosity, actually, because he wants to make something beautiful to give at an affordable price. There's actually something fitting about that generosity keeps him from getting flush with this little book. That's a good opening to the story we're about to read together. Let me now move into just a different kind of background, which I would say is more literary background. I just want to talk about some of the literary things in the air, details, elements in the air that can help us understand how this thing would have looked and what some of its associations and layers were literarily. To do this, I want to actually turn open to the title page. So on the title page of the book here, what do we have? A Christmas Carol in Prose, being a ghost story of Christmas by Charles Dickens. We all know this title. We've been hearing it our whole lives. It's in a way so firmly stapled to this book. What does it even mean? What are its associations? Why was he naming it this? Well, obviously there's a musical framework there that he's going for. Christmas Carol is a piece of music. The staves into which this book is organized, the chapters are called staves, are musical staffs. So there's musical framing. But it's a specific kind of music, isn't it? Because Christmas music is different. It has a different set of associations. It has a different kind of atmosphere and imaginative world that it is bringing us into. What is Christmas music like? That's important to think about here. If you've heard the Nutcracker, or if you could think of your favorite Christmas hymns, they all tend to have this kind of twinkling darkness, if I can call it that, or a certain bittersweet light in darkness effect. We could say that they tend to be mysterious in a certain way. That's really important for the Christmas Carol. That is definitely the atmosphere that Dickens is trying to manufacture here. And he gets it in part just by the title, A Christmas Carol. We're already in that mysterious midwinter setting where beautiful things happen in the midst of a cold, hard time. A ghost story of Christmas. This is also a story of hauntings. And we should notice in the preface, which is the second page, this is a ghostly little book, he says there, and that it's meant to haunt the house of the reader pleasantly. That's what he wants. So when we're thinking of this as a ghost story, obviously there's a whole tradition of ghost stories that he's trying to place this book among. But it's interesting to note, even before we start reading the first page of the book, he's trying to present this book as another ghost to haunt us in the way that the ghosts of Christmas haunt Scrooge. So we'll keep that in mind as we go. The other kind of narrative that's worth keeping in mind as we get into A Christmas Carol is conversion narrative. This is a story of conversion. Conversion just means turning away from one point to another. And of course, religious conversion narratives, very common at this time. We associate the early 19th century in America with the Second Great Awakening. There are similar kinds of things happening in the UK. And so literature of conversion, stories of dramatic turnings, these are in the water. This is a known quantity. And this is another genre that's at play as we start A Christmas Carol. One last genre we can keep in mind here is the dream vision. All right. We know that this all happens in the middle of the night. This novella is all in darkness, until the final stave. So it's very much a nighttime, a nocturnal drama. And it all happens with Scrooge waking up. He's not even sure that these things are really happening. Of course they are, but he can barely believe it. That is the way that the dream vision tradition works typically. We can think all the way back to John the Evangelist writing the book of Revelation. This is a dream. We can think of Dante's Divine Comedy. He also awakes and has this profound vision, which brings about his conversion. So there's this long tradition of dream vision. That's a really important genre. What genre is this finally? It's all of these. A Christmas Carol is a meld of multiple different genres. There's also kind of realism in there. We get the gritty realism of the London streets and the poor. It's a mix of all of these. It's not going to let us pin it down that easily. It's its own thing. And so we're finished with our introduction now. We're ready to begin the first stave, the first haunting of Ebenezer Scrooge, where we will hear the famous opening lines of this book. Marley was dead to begin with. I'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hillsdale Online Courses podcast. If you want to continue learning about A Christmas Carol or other topics, please visit hillsdale.edu/course. There you will find over 40 free online courses, including the history of classical music, Paradise Lost, Theology 101, and many more. The courses include additional readings, study guides, fully produced videos, and you can chat with your fellow students on a dedicated forum. Upon completing a course, you will also get a certificate. All our courses are free because we believe that a virtuous citizen is the best defense for liberty. So pursue the education necessary for freedom and happiness at hillsdale.edu/course today. That's hillsdale.edu/course. Thanks for listening.